They said she was worthless. No wolf, no power, no future. But when two newborn princes screamed themselves bloody and no one in the kingdom could silence them, she walked into that nursery, and the impossible happened. They stopped crying, only for her. The Alpha King should have thanked her. Instead, he condemned her to death. What Lyra didn't know, she wasn't just a servant, she was his greatest secret and his biggest mistake. This is the story of a girl who had nothing, lost everything, and still refused to break. Stick around until the end. You won't believe what happens when the truth finally comes out. And if this story grabs you, hit that like button and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. Let's go. The palace didn't have a name for girls like Lyra. Servants had ranks, cooks, chambermaids, stable hands. Even the lowest scrubber had a title, a function, a reason to exist. But Lyra? She was just there. A shadow that moved through stone corridors, shoulders hunched, eyes down, always half a step behind everyone else. She hauled water no one else wanted to carry. She cleaned corners no one else could reach. She ate scraps after the dogs were fed, and she did it all without a wolf. In the Iron Ridge Kingdom, that made her less than human. Everyone else could shift. Everyone else had a beast inside them, a second soul that gave them strength, speed, healing. Even the Omega children in the outer villages had their wolves by the time they turned 13. Lyra was 19 now, still empty, still broken. The other servants whispered that she was cursed, that her mother must have been a witch or a whore, or both. That she'd probably die young, alone, unmissed. Lyra had stopped arguing years ago. She kept her head down. She worked. She survived. Until the night the princes were born. And it started with screaming. Not the normal kind. Childbirth was always loud in the palace. Women screamed. Healers shouted. Midwives barked orders. But this was different. This was two newborns shrieking in perfect, horrible harmony, their cries cutting through the stone walls like knives. It had been going on for hours. Maybe longer. Lyra had lost track. She was scrubbing the floor outside the nursery when the door slammed open and a healer stumbled out, her face gray with exhaustion. "They won't stop," the woman muttered to no one in particular. "Nothing works. Not milk, not rocking, not shifting into fur to warm them. Nothing. I've never seen anything like it." Another healer followed, younger, angrier. "Where the hell is the queen? She should be here. They're her sons." "She's on the front lines, you idiot. She can't just abandon the war because then someone needs to do something before the Alpha King hears this and loses his mind." Lyra kept scrubbing. She wasn't supposed to listen. She wasn't supposed to care. But the screaming, God, the screaming, it crawled under her skin and stayed there, vibrating in her bones. She'd heard plenty of babies cry before. This was different. This sounded like pain, like fear, like they were calling for someone who wasn't coming. A third healer came out, this one older, her hands shaking. "I'm done. I can't do this anymore. If the king asks, tell him I tried." "You're just going to leave them?" "What else can I do? They don't want us. They want her. She's not here." "I know that." The old woman's voice cracked. "But until she comes back, those boys are going to scream themselves to death, and there's not a damn thing we can do about it." The door slammed shut again. Lyra sat back on her heels, staring at the wet stone floor. Her hands were red and raw from the lye soap. Her knees ached. Her back hurt. She should go. She should finish this hallway and move on to the kitchens like she was supposed to. But the crying didn't stop, and for some reason she couldn't explain. It felt like it was calling to her. She stood up slowly, her legs stiff from kneeling. The bucket of dirty water sloshed beside her. The hallway was empty now. The healers had scattered, probably to drink or sleep or cry in private. No one was watching. Lyra wiped her hands on her apron and walked to the nursery door. Her hand hovered over the handle. "This is stupid. You're not a healer. You're not even a real person here. If they catch you..." The screaming spiked, sharp and desperate, and her hand moved before she could think. The door opened. The nursery was chaos. Two wooden cribs sat side by side near the fireplace, both draped in soft furs and silk blankets that had been kicked into tangled heaps. The room smelled like sour milk and sweat and something sharper, fear maybe, or exhaustion. A single candle burned on the mantel, casting long shadows across the stone walls. And in the cribs, two tiny princes screamed. Lyra had never seen newborns this close before. She'd always imagined them as soft, peaceful little things, like the stories said. But these two were red-faced and furious, their fists clenched, their mouths open wide enough to show pink gums and tiny tongues. One of them had dark hair, the other lighter. Twins, both already strong enough to make the palace shake. She should leave. She should run. Instead, she walked closer. "Hey," she whispered. Her voice sounded strange in the quiet between their screams. "Hey, it's okay. You're okay." The darker-haired one stopped mid-cry and turned his head toward her, his eyes, bright gold, already showing signs of his wolf, locked onto hers. Lyra froze. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Then slowly, the baby's mouth closed. His little chest hitched once, twice, and then he went still, silent. The second baby kept screaming for a few more seconds before he too seemed to notice her. His cries faded into hiccups, then into soft, shuddering breaths. And then, nothing. The room was so quiet, Lyra could hear her own heartbeat. She didn't move, didn't breathe, just stood there, staring at two princes who were staring back at her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. "What the hell did you do?" Lyra spun around. A young healer stood in the doorway, her eyes wide with shock. Behind her, two more women appeared, their faces frozen in identical expressions of disbelief. I didn't," Lyra stammered. They stopped crying." The healer stepped forward, her gaze darting between Lyra and the cribs. "How did you—" "I don't know. Don't lie to me. What did you do?" "Nothing. I swear, Lyra backed toward the door, her heart pounding. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have come in. I'll go." One of the babies whimpered. All three healers flinched. The darker-haired prince, his name was Caden, Lyra would learn later, started to cry again. Not the full-throated scream from before, but a softer, sadder sound, like he was asking a question. The second baby joined in. "No, no, no," one of the healers muttered. "Not again, please, not again." Lyra didn't think, she just moved. She crossed the room in 3 steps, leaned over the nearest crib, and placed her hand on the baby's chest. His skin was warm, his heart beat fast and fluttery under her palm. "Shh," she murmured. "I'm here. It's okay." The crying stopped. Both babies went still again, their eyes locked on her face. The room held its breath. "Pick him up," one of the healers whispered. Lyra blinked. "What?" "Pick him up." "I can't." "Do it!" Her hands were shaking as she slid them under the baby's tiny body and lifted him out of the crib. He was so light, so fragile. She'd never held a baby before. She was terrified she'd drop him, hurt him, break him. But the moment she cradled him against her chest, he sighed, a soft, contented sound. And then he closed his eyes. "Holy shit," one of the healers breathed. Lyra looked down at the sleeping prince in her arms and felt something crack open inside her chest. Something warm and terrifying and impossibly big. She didn't know what it was, but it felt like home. They made her stay. Not because they wanted her there, none of the healers trusted her, and the palace staff made that clear with their glares and muttered insults, but because the princes wouldn't tolerate anyone else. For 3 days, Lyra lived in the nursery. She slept on the floor beside the cribs. She fed them milk from glass bottles the healers prepared. She changed their swaddling cloths and rocked them when they fussed. And every time she stepped away, even for a moment, they screamed. It didn't make sense. Lyra was nobody. She had no rank, no power, no wolf. She couldn't offer them strength or protection or healing. But somehow, they'd decided she was theirs. And she'd decided they were hers. "You're getting attached," one of the older servants warned her on the 4th day. The woman had brought clean linens for the cribs, her expression halfway between pity and disgust. "That's a mistake, girl. You know that, right?" Lyra didn't look up from the baby in her arms. Kieran, the lighter-haired one. He was awake, staring at her with those strange golden eyes that saw too much. "I'm just doing what they asked," she said quietly. "For now. But the queen will come back eventually. And when she does, you'll be right back where you started, scrubbing floors, eating scraps, being nothing." Lyra's chest tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "I know." "Do you?" The woman set the linens down and crossed her arms. Because I've seen this before. Some nobody gets a taste of being useful, being seen, and they start thinking they matter. That maybe someone will notice them. Maybe someone will care. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. They won't. You're wolfless, Lyra. That means you're broken, and broken things don't get to dream. The woman left. Lyra sat there staring at the door, her throat tight. Kieran made a soft sound and grabbed her finger with his tiny hand. She looked down at him. I'm not dreaming, she whispered. I'm just here. But even as she said it, she knew it was a lie. Because somewhere deep down, in a place she didn't want to admit existed, she was dreaming. She was dreaming that maybe, just maybe, this could last. The Alpha King returned on the 7th day. Lyra heard him before she saw him. The sound of boots on stone, heavy, purposeful, followed by voices, low, tense, urgent. The whole palace seemed to shift when he walked through it, like the walls themselves were bowing. She was feeding Caden when the door to the nursery opened. 3 men entered. The first was a guard, his face blank and professional. The second was an advisor, thin and sharp-eyed, already scanning the room like he was cataloging every detail. And the third, Lyra's breath caught. The Alpha King. She'd never seen him up close before. He was tall, taller than anyone she'd ever met, with broad shoulders and a presence that filled the room like smoke. His hair was dark, streaked with silver at the temples, and his eyes were the same gold as his son's. But where theirs were soft and curious, his were cold, hard, unforgiving. He looked at the cribs first, then at the healers, who'd suddenly materialized from the side rooms, all bowing and murmuring greetings. And then his gaze landed on Lyra. She froze. Caden was still in her arms, halfway through his bottle, milk dribbling down his chin. Lyra's fingers tightened on the glass, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack a rib. "Who is that?" the king asked. His voice was low, calm, but there was something underneath it, something sharp and dangerous. One of the healers stepped forward, wringing her hands. "Your Majesty, this is, well, she's been helping with the princes. I didn't ask for an explanation. I asked who she is." "Her name is Lyra, Your Majesty. She's a servant. A servant." The king's eyes narrowed. "And why is a servant holding my son?" Lyra opened her mouth to answer, but no sound came out. The advisor stepped in, his tone smooth and practiced. "Your Majesty, there was an incident when the princes were first born. They were inconsolable. The healers tried everything, but nothing worked. This girl," he gestured vaguely at Lyra like she was a piece of furniture, "happened to be nearby. When she entered the room, the crying stopped." The king didn't move, didn't blink. "So you let a wolfless nobody near my children?" The healer flinched. "We didn't have a choice, Your Majesty. They wouldn't calm for anyone else." "We thought, you thought." The king's voice rose just slightly, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "You thought it was acceptable to allow an unvetted, powerless servant to have access to the future heirs of this kingdom? Your Majesty, please get her out." Lyra's stomach dropped. "Your Majesty," the healer tried again, desperation creeping into her voice. "If we remove her, the princes will—" "I don't care. Get her out." The guard moved forward. Lyra didn't resist. She carefully, gently, placed Caden back in his crib and stepped away. Her hands were shaking. Her legs felt like water. Caden started to cry. Then Kieran. Within seconds, both princes were screaming again, that same horrible, soul-shredding sound that had haunted the palace for days. The king's jaw tightened. "Stop them!" he ordered. The healers rushed forward, lifting the babies, rocking them, whispering soothing words. But nothing worked. The crying only got louder. Lyra stood by the door, her arms wrapped around herself, watching. One of the healers looked at the king, her face pale. "Your Majesty, I'm sorry, but they won't—" "Then figure it out!" The king's voice cracked like a whip. "You're healers, aren't you? Do your job." "We've tried everything, Your Majesty. They only respond to her." "Then she stays," the advisor said quickly. "For now. Until the queen returns or until we find another solution. The king turned to glare at him. Are you giving me orders? Of course not, your majesty. I'm simply suggesting, I don't need suggestions, I need competence. The king looked at Lyra again, his expression unreadable. If she stays under guard. She doesn't leave this room. She doesn't speak to anyone. And the moment my sons no longer need her, she's gone. Understood? The advisor nodded. Yes, your majesty. The king turned and walked out without another word. The guard stayed. Lyra stood there, her heart still racing, as the healers reluctantly brought the crying princes back to her. She took them. They stopped screaming, and Lyra realized with a sinking, sickening certainty that she'd just made herself both indispensable and condemned. The next 3 weeks blurred together. Lyra lived in the nursery. She slept when the princes slept. She ate when the healers remembered to bring her food. She spoke to no one, and no one spoke to her, except to give orders or ask questions about the babies. The guard was always there, standing by the door, silent and stone-faced. Lyra tried not to think about what would happen when this ended, because it would end. She wasn't stupid. The queen would come back. The princes would grow. They'd stop needing her, and then she'd go back to being invisible. Or worse. But for now, right now, she had this. She had 2 little lives that depended on her, 2 pairs of golden eyes that lit up when she walked into the room, 2 tiny hands that reached for her, and no one else. It wasn't love. She wasn't naive enough to call it that, but it was something, and something was more than she'd ever had before. Caden was the bolder of the 2. Even at just a few weeks old, he was already trying to hold his head up, already making little growling sounds when he was frustrated. He had his father's intensity, Lyra thought, that same burning focus. Kieran was quieter, more watchful. He cried less, but when he did, it was softer, like he didn't want to be a burden. He'd stare at Lyra for long stretches, his tiny brow furrowed, like he was trying to figure her out. She loved them both. She wasn't supposed to. She knew that. But she did, and that terrified her. On the 23rd day, the queen came home. Lyra heard the commotion from the nursery, horns blowing, soldiers shouting, the distant roar of celebration. The war was over. The queen had won. The healers were giddy with relief, already preparing the room, fluffing pillows and lighting extra candles. The guard at the door stood straighter. Lyra sat in the corner, holding both princes, and tried not to shake. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. The door opened, and the queen walked in. She was beautiful. That was the first thing Lyra noticed. Tall and strong, with long dark hair braided back from her face and eyes the color of storm clouds. She was still wearing her armor, black leather and steel, streaked with mud and blood, but she moved like she'd already forgotten the battlefield. Her gaze went straight to the cribs, then to Lyra. "Where are my sons?" the queen asked. Her voice was softer than Lyra expected. Tired, raw. One of the healers stepped forward, bowing. "Your Majesty, they're right here. The girl, Lyra, she's been caring for them." The queen's eyes narrowed slightly. "The wolfless one." "Yes, Your Majesty." The queen crossed the room in 3 long strides and stopped in front of Lyra. Lyra's breath caught. She wanted to stand, to bow, to do something, but she was holding both babies, and moving felt impossible. The queen knelt down. She looked at her sons, really looked at them, and something in her expression cracked. "They're so big," she whispered. Caden made a happy little sound and kicked his legs. The queen's eyes filled with tears. She reached out slowly, carefully, and took Caden from Lyra's arms. He fussed for a second, confused, but then he caught his mother's scent and went still. "Hi, baby," the queen murmured, her voice breaking. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Lyra carefully handed over Kieran. The queen held both of them now, tears streaming down her face, and Lyra felt something inside her chest collapse. This was it. This was the end. She'd done her job. The princes had their mother back. They didn't need her anymore. Lyra stood up quietly and moved toward the door. "Wait." She stopped. The queen was looking at her now, her expression unreadable. "What's your name?" the queen asked. "Lyra, Your Majesty." "Lyra." The queen repeated it slowly, like she was tasting the sound. Thank you for keeping them alive, for keeping them safe. Lyra nodded, her throat too tight to speak. You can go, the queen said. And just like that, it was over. Lyra walked back to the servants' quarters in a daze. No one looked at her. No one spoke to her. It was like the last 3 weeks had never happened. She went back to her cot in the corner of the storage room, back to her bucket and brush and bar of lye soap, back to being nothing. The next morning, she was assigned to scrub the floors in the east wing. She worked in silence, her hands moving automatically, her mind blank. It was better this way, she told herself. Safer. She'd always known this would happen, but knowing didn't make it hurt less. 2 days later, she saw them again. She was carrying a load of linens through the main corridor when she heard voices up ahead. She slowed, instinct telling her to stay out of sight. The queen was there, walking with the king and a cluster of advisors. And in her arms, Caden and Kieran. Lyra's heart clenched. They looked good, healthy, content. The queen was smiling, laughing at something one of the advisors said. Everything was fine. Everything was as it should be. Lyra started to turn away. And then Caden saw her. His head turned, his golden eyes locking onto hers across the distance. And he started to scream. Not the soft, questioning cry from before. This was the other scream, the one that shook walls. Kieran joined in immediately. The queen froze, her smile vanishing. What's wrong? Why are they... Caden twisted in her arms, reaching toward Lyra, his face red and furious. The advisors started talking all at once, suggesting things, milk, a nap, a healer. But the queen wasn't listening. She was staring at Lyra, and Lyra, God help her, stared back. The queen's expression shifted. Surprise, confusion, and then something darker, realization. You, the queen said quietly. Lyra's pulse spiked. Your Majesty, I didn't... Come here. It wasn't a request. Lyra set down the linens and walked forward on shaking legs. The moment she got close, both princes stopped crying. They reached for her, and the queen, slowly, reluctantly, handed them over. The babies settled immediately, their cries fading into soft, contented sounds. The corridor was silent. Everyone was staring. The queen's face was unreadable. How long has this been happening? She asked, her voice tight. One of the healers stepped forward nervously. Since they were born, Your Majesty. We tried to eat. Why wasn't I told? You were at war, Your Majesty. We didn't want to... I want her in the nursery. Now. The healer blinked. Your Majesty? You heard me. If my sons won't calm for anyone else, then she stays. Figure it out. The queen turned and walked away, her jaw set, her hands clenched into fists. The advisors followed, whispering among themselves, and Lyra was left standing there holding 2 princes who had just rewritten her entire life. Again. She moved back into the nursery that night. This time, there was no pretending it was temporary. The queen made it clear. Lyra was to stay with the princes at all times. She would feed them, bathe them, soothe them. She would sleep in their room, eat her meals there, and speak to no one unless spoken to first. It should have felt like a prison, but it didn't. Because the princes needed her, and for the first time in her life, Lyra felt like she had a purpose. Weeks turned into months. The bond between Lyra and the princes grew stronger. Caden learned to smile, and he smiled at her first. Kieran learned to laugh, and it was Lyra who made him giggle by making silly faces. The queen visited often, but the boys were always fussy with her, restless, uncertain. It wasn't personal, Lyra told herself. They just didn't know her yet. But the queen's expression grew colder every time, and the whispers in the palace grew louder. A wolfless servant raising the future kings. It's unnatural. It's an insult. Lyra ignored them. She had to. Because the alternative, losing the princes, losing this fragile, impossible thing she'd built, was unthinkable. She was changing Kieran's diaper one afternoon when the door slammed open. The Alpha King stood there, his face twisted with rage. Get away from him, he snarled. Lyra's hands froze. Your Majesty, I said, get away! She stepped back, her heart hammering. The king stormed across the room and scooped Kieran up, holding him at arm's length like he was inspecting a piece of damaged goods. Kieran started to cry. Your Majesty, please, Lyra started. Shut up. The king's voice was ice. You don't speak. You don't move. You don't exist unless I say so. He looked at his son, his expression hard. This is my heir, my blood, my legacy. And you. He turned that cold gaze on Lyra. You are nothing. Do you understand me? You're a mistake, a placeholder. The moment I find someone else, anyone else, who can do what you do, you're gone. Lyra's throat burned. I understand, Your Majesty. Good. He set Kieran back in the crib, roughly, carelessly, and walked out. Kieran kept crying. Lyra picked him up, her hands shaking, and held him close. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. But she wasn't sure who she was apologizing to, him or herself. That night, she lay on her cot and stared at the ceiling. The princes were asleep. The palace was quiet. And Lyra, for the first time in months, let herself cry. Because she'd made the worst mistake of her life. She'd started to believe she mattered. And now, when it all fell apart, and it would, she knew it would. She had no idea how she'd survive it. The winter came early that year, brutal and unforgiving. Snow piled against the palace walls in drifts taller than a man. The wind howled through the stone corridors like something alive and angry. Fires burned day and night, but the cold still crept in through the cracks, settling into bones and lungs and hearts. Lyra barely noticed. She lived in the nursery now, truly lived there. Not as a guest or a temporary solution, but as a fixture, a piece of furniture that happened to breathe. The healers came and went. The queen visited when her schedule allowed. But Lyra was always there, day and night, caught in the strange rhythm of feeding schedules and diaper changes and lullabies she half remembered from childhood. The princes were 4 months old now, growing fast. Caden had already started trying to roll over, his chubby fists pounding the blankets in frustration when he couldn't quite make it. Kieran was quieter, more deliberate. He'd study Lyra's face for long minutes, his golden eyes tracking every expression, like he was filing it all away for later. She talked to them constantly. Stupid things mostly. The weather, the color of the blankets, stories she made up on the spot about brave wolves and kind maidens and kingdoms where everyone was welcome. She knew they couldn't understand her, but it made her feel less alone. The other servants had stopped acknowledging her existence entirely. When she passed them in the halls, on the rare occasion she was allowed to leave the nursery, they looked through her like she was glass. Even the healers spoke to her in clipped professional tones, their eyes always sliding away from hers. The message was clear. She didn't belong here. She was tolerated, not accepted. And the moment her usefulness ran out, she'd be discarded. Lyra told herself she was fine with that. She was lying. The queen came to visit on a Thursday afternoon, her arrival announced by the sharp click of boots on stone. Lyra was on the floor with the princes, letting Caden grab at her fingers while Kieran watched from his blanket nearby. She looked up as the door opened, instinctively smoothing her hair back, though she didn't know why she bothered. The queen had never cared what she looked like. Your Majesty. Lyra started to rise, but the queen waved her off. Stay. I'm not here for ceremony. The queen crossed to the cribs and stood there for a moment, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. She was dressed simply today. No armor, no crown, just a dark wool dress and boots. But she still carried herself like a warrior, like someone who'd seen the worst the world had to offer and refused to flinch. They look healthy, the queen said finally. They are, Your Majesty. Caden's bigger. He eats more. The queen's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. Of course he does. He's going to be a terror when he's older. Lyra didn't respond. She wasn't sure if she was supposed to. The queen knelt down beside Caden and reached out to touch his cheek. He turned toward her hand, curious, and made a soft cooing sound. For a moment, Lyra thought it might actually work this time. Then Caden's face scrunched up, his mouth opened, and he started to wail. The queen pulled back like she'd been burned. Kieran joined in half a second later, his cries higher-pitched, more desperate. "Damn it!" the queen muttered. Lyra scooped up Caden, holding him against her chest and rocking gently. The crying stopped almost immediately. Kieran quieted too, watching her with those two knowing eyes. The queen stood up slowly, her jaw tight. "How long is this going to last?" she asked. Lyra blinked. "Your Majesty? This, whatever this is, this bond, how long until they accept me?" "I don't know, Your Majesty. I think—" Lyra hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "I think they just need time. They're still so young. Once they get older, once they understand—" "They should understand now." The queen's voice was sharp. "I'm their mother. I carried them. I fought a war to keep this kingdom safe for them. And they look at me like I'm a stranger." Lyra didn't know what to say to that. The queen turned away, her hands clenched into fists. "The advisors are asking questions, wondering why the future heirs prefer a wolfless servant over their own bloodline. It makes us look weak. It makes me look weak." "I'm sorry, Your Majesty." "Don't apologize, just—" The queen stopped, exhaling hard. "Just fix it. Whatever you're doing to make them dependent on you, stop. Pull back. Let them learn to need someone else." Lyra's chest went cold. "Your Majesty, I'm not doing anything. I swear. I just—" "Then why won't they let me hold them without screaming?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Lyra looked down at Caden, who had fallen asleep against her shoulder, his tiny hand fisted in her shirt. "I don't know," she whispered. The queen stared at her for a long moment. Then she turned and walked out without another word. The door closed with a soft click. Lyra sat there, holding a sleeping prince, and felt the ground shift beneath her. This wasn't sustainable. She'd known that from the beginning, but now it was becoming real. The queen was getting frustrated, the advisors were whispering, and the king. The king wanted her gone. It was only a matter of time before someone decided the princes didn't need her anymore. And when that happened, Lyra had no idea what she'd do. The whispers started getting louder after that. Lyra heard them in fragments, servants gossiping in the hallways, healers muttering when they thought she wasn't listening, guards trading rumors outside the nursery door. She's done something to them, cast a spell. No, she's just manipulative. Wolfless trash always are. The queen should banish her, before it's too late. Lyra kept her head down and focused on the princes. She couldn't control what people said. She could only do her job, but the fear was starting to creep in. What if they were right? What if she was doing something wrong, something unnatural, without even realizing it? She had no wolf, no power, no magic. So why did the princes only want her? Tim. 2 weeks later, the king summoned the queen to a private meeting. Lyra only knew about it because one of the younger healers, a girl named Marin, who sometimes brought extra bread from the kitchens, mentioned it in passing. "Big meeting today," Marin said as she set down a tray of food. "The king, the queen, and half the council. They've been in there for hours." Lyra's stomach twisted. "Do you know what it's about?" Marin glanced at the door, then lowered her voice. "You." "What?" "The king wants you removed, permanently. He's been pushing for it since the princes were born, but the queen kept shutting him down. Now, though," she trailed off, biting her lip. "Now what?" "Now the council's on his side. They think you're a threat. They're saying the prince's attachment to you is unnatural, that it could weaken them when they're older." Lyra's throat went dry. "What does the queen think?" "I don't know. But she's been in there a long time." Marin's expression softened. "I'm sorry, Lyra. I know you care about them. But this place, it doesn't care about that. It only cares about power." She left before Lyra could respond. Lyra stood there, her hands shaking, staring at the two sleeping princes in their cribs. If the king got his way, she'd be gone by tomorrow. And the princes? She couldn't think about that. If she did, she'd fall apart. The queen came to the nursery late that night. Lyra was awake. She'd barely slept in days, sitting in the chair by the fire, watching the shadows dance across the walls. The door opened quietly, and the queen stepped inside. She looked exhausted. Her hair was loose, falling around her shoulders in dark waves, and her eyes were red-rimmed. She didn't say anything at first, just walked over to the cribs and stood there, staring down at her sons. "They're beautiful," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Lyra nodded. They are. I wanted them so badly. For years I thought I couldn't have children. And then, the Queen's voice cracked. And then they came. 2 perfect little miracles. And I thought everything would finally make sense. She turned to look at Lyra, and there was something raw in her expression. Something broken. But they don't want me, the Queen said. They want you. Lyra's chest ached. Your Majesty, I know. The Queen held up a hand. I know you didn't do this on purpose, but that doesn't change the fact that it's happening, and it's tearing this family apart. She crossed the room and sat down in the chair across from Lyra, her shoulders slumping. The king wants you gone, she said bluntly. He's convinced you're dangerous, that you're using some kind of dark magic to control the boys. I'm not. I swear, I know. But it doesn't matter. He's not going to stop until you're out of this palace, and the council... She exhaled hard. The council agrees with him. They think the prince's attachment to you makes them look weak, that it undermines their authority. Lyra's hands clenched in her lap. What are you going to do? The Queen was quiet for a long moment. I don't know, she admitted. If I fight this, I lose political capital. I can't afford to lose. But if I let them remove you... She looked at the cribs again. I don't know what it'll do to my sons. They'll survive, Lyra said quietly. They're strong. They'll adapt. Will they? The Queen's gaze was piercing. You've been with them every day since they were born. You're the only constant they've ever known. If we tear you away from them now... She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Lyra swallowed hard. What do you want me to do? The Queen stood up, her expression hardening. I want you to stay away from them. Starting tomorrow. No more feeding, no more holding, no more comforting. Let the healers take over. Let me take over. We need to break this bond before it's too late. Lyra felt like she'd been punched in the gut. Your Majesty. It's not a request, Lyra. It's an order. The Queen walked to the door, then paused, her hand on the handle. I'm sorry, she said without turning around. But this is the only way. And then she was gone. Lyra didn't sleep that night. She sat in the chair, staring at the princes, memorizing every detail. The way Caden's nose scrunched when he dreamed. The soft sighs Kieran made when he shifted in his sleep. Tomorrow she wouldn't be allowed to touch them. Tomorrow she'd be nothing again. The thought made her want to scream. But she didn't. She just sat there, silent and still, until the sun started to rise. The healers came early, 3 of them, led by an older woman named Bretta, who'd always looked at Lyra with thinly veiled contempt. You're relieved, Bretta said flatly. Go to your quarters. We'll take it from here. Lyra stood up slowly, her legs stiff from sitting all night. We know what they need. We're trained for this. You're not. The word stung, but Lyra didn't argue. She looked at the cribs one last time, her throat tight, and then walked out. The door closed behind her. And from inside the nursery, the screaming started. Then, it went on for hours. Lyra could hear it from her quarters, a small, windowless room in the servants' wing that smelled like mildew and old stone. She sat on her cot, her hands pressed over her ears, but it didn't help. The sound cut through walls, through doors, through her skull. She'd known this would happen, but knowing didn't make it easier. Around midday, one of the younger servants, a boy named Tam, knocked on her door. They're asking for you, he said, his voice tight with stress. The healers. They can't get the princes to stop crying. Lyra shook her head. The Queen said, I know what the Queen said, but the boys are making themselves sick. They've been screaming for 5 hours straight. They won't eat. They won't sleep. If this keeps up... He didn't finish. Lyra closed her eyes. I can't. If I go back, the king will... The king isn't here. He left this morning for the Northern Territories. He won't be back for 3 days. Her eyes snapped open. Please, Tam said. Just until they calm down. Then you can leave again. Lyra stood up before she could talk herself out of it. The nursery was chaos when she walked in. 4 healers were clustered around the cribs, all talking at once, their voices high and panicked. Caden was red-faced and hoarse, his cries ragged and broken. Kieran's screams were quieter, but somehow worse, thin and desperate, like he was begging for something no one could give him. Bretta looked up as Lyra entered, and for the first time there was no contempt in her expression, just exhaustion. "Thank the gods," she muttered. "Get over here." Lyra crossed the room and picked up Caden. He stopped crying immediately. The silence was deafening. She reached for Kieran with her free arm, cradling both of them against her chest, and felt them settle. Their breathing evened out, their tiny fists unclenched. The healers stared at her like she'd performed a miracle. "How?" one of them whispered. Lyra didn't answer. She didn't have an answer. Bretta rubbed her face with both hands. "The Queen's going to lose her mind when she finds out we called you back." "Then don't tell her," Lyra said quietly. "We have to. She gave explicit orders. Then tell her the truth, that the princes wouldn't stop crying, that you did what you had to do to keep them safe." Lyra looked down at the sleeping babies in her arms. "She'll understand." Bretta didn't look convinced, but she nodded. "Fine. But you stay here. Don't leave. Don't give anyone a reason to—" The door slammed open. The Queen stood there, her face pale with fury. "What the hell is going on?" she said. Everyone started talking at once. The Queen held up a hand, silencing them, and walked straight to Lyra. "I gave you an order," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "I know, Your Majesty, but—" "No buts. I told you to stay away from them." "They were screaming themselves sick," Bretta interjected. "We tried everything, Your Majesty. Nothing worked." "Because you're not trying hard enough. We tried for 5 hours." Bretta's voice cracked. "They wouldn't eat. They wouldn't sleep. They were turning blue from crying so hard. What were we supposed to do? Let them die?" The Queen's jaw tightened. "Of course not. Then what do you want from us?" "From her." Bretta gestured at Lyra. "You want her gone, but the boys need her. You can't have it both ways." The Queen stared at Lyra, her expression unreadable. Then she turned to the healers. "Everyone out." They hesitated. "Now." The healers filed out quickly, Bretta shooting Lyra one last worried glance before the door closed. The Queen walked to the window and stood there, her back to Lyra, her shoulders tense. "Do you know what the king said to me?" the Queen asked quietly. "When I told him I wanted to keep you here?" Lyra didn't answer. "He said I was being weak, that I was letting sentiment cloud my judgment, that a real queen would put the kingdom first, not her own feelings." The Queen's voice hardened. "And maybe he's right." "Your Majesty, I can't protect you, Lyra." The Queen turned, and there were tears in her eyes. "I want to, but I can't. The king has made up his mind, and when he gets back—" She didn't finish. Lyra's heart sank. "How long do I have?" she asked. 3 days? Maybe less." Lyra looked down at the princes, still sleeping peacefully in her arms. 3 days. That was all she had left. The next 2 days passed in a haze. Lyra stayed in the nursery, soaking up every moment. She memorized the weight of the princes in her arms, the sound of their breathing, the way Caden's hair curled at the nape of his neck, and Kieran's eyes crinkled when he smiled. She told them stories, sang them songs, held them until her arms ached, and she tried, desperately, futilely, not to think about what would happen when the king came back. On the 3rd day, the bells started ringing, not the normal ones that marked the hours. The alarm bells. Lyra's head snapped up. Outside, she could hear shouting, running footsteps, the clash of metal. One of the guards burst into the nursery, his face white. "We're under attack," he said. "The southern rebels, they breached the outer walls." Lyra's blood went cold. "Where's the Queen?" "Leading the defense," she said. He hesitated. "She said to get the princes to the safe room. Now." Lyra didn't think. She grabbed both babies, wrapping them in blankets, and followed the guard into the hallway. The palace was chaos. Soldiers ran in every direction. Servants screamed. Somewhere in the distance, something exploded. The guard led her down a side corridor toward the lower levels where the safe rooms were hidden. They were halfway there when the ceiling caved in. Lyra hit the ground hard, pain exploding through her shoulder. Dust and debris rained down. She couldn't see, couldn't breathe. The princes were screaming. She wrapped her body around them, shielding them with everything she had, and prayed the ceiling would stop falling. When the dust cleared, the guard was gone, buried under rubble, dead. Lyra stared at his body, her mind blank with shock. Then Caden screamed again, and she snapped back. She had to move, had to get them to safety. But the hallway ahead was blocked, and behind her she could hear footsteps, heavy, armed, getting closer. Lyra made a choice. She ran, not toward the safe room, not toward the queen or the soldiers or anyone who might help. She ran toward the only exit she could find, the servants' entrance, the one that led outside, into the snow, into the wilderness, into certain death. But at least they'd die together. The cold hit her like a fist. Lyra stumbled through the servants' entrance and into the blizzard, the wind tearing at her clothes, snow stinging her face like needles. She couldn't see more than a few feet ahead, couldn't hear anything over the roar of the storm and the pounding of her own heart. The princes were screaming in her arms, their tiny bodies rigid with cold and fear. She pulled the blankets tighter around them, tucking them against her chest, and ran. Behind her, the palace burned. She could see the orange glow through the snow, could smell smoke mixing with the clean, sharp scent of winter. Explosions echoed across the courtyard. Men shouted, steel clashed. And somewhere in that chaos, the queen was fighting. Lyra should go back, should find help, should do literally anything other than run blindly into a blizzard with two infants who wouldn't survive an hour in this cold. But her legs kept moving, because going back meant the king, meant the dungeon, meant death. And at least out here, she could pretend she had a choice. The snow was already ankle-deep and getting deeper. Lyra's shoes, thin leather things meant for indoor work, were soaked through in seconds. Her toes went numb. Her fingers, clutching the babies, started to ache. She had no plan, no destination, no idea where she was even going. She just ran. Chum. She made it maybe half a mile before her legs gave out. Lyra collapsed against a tree, gasping for air, her lungs burning. The princes were still crying, softer now, weaker, and that scared her more than the screaming had. She looked down at them. Their little faces were red from the cold, their lips starting to turn blue. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." Caden's eyes locked onto hers, not accusing, just watching, waiting, like he trusted her to fix this. Lyra's throat closed up. She couldn't fix this. She was going to get them killed. She'd made the worst decision of her life, and now two innocent babies were going to freeze to death because she was too much of a coward to face the king. The wind howled, snow piled against her legs, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled back. Lyra's head snapped up. Wolves, real ones, not shifters. The forest was full of them, wild packs that hunted anything that moved. She'd heard the guards talk about them, about travelers found torn apart in the snow, about how the beasts could smell blood from miles away. She looked down at her hands, at the cut on her palm from when she'd hit the ground during the explosion. Blood. The wolves would find her. It was only a matter of time. She had to move. Lyra forced herself to her feet, her legs shaking, and started walking again. She didn't know which direction, didn't care. She just needed to put distance between herself and the howling. But the cold was getting worse. Her whole body was shaking now. Her teeth chattered so hard she thought they might crack. The princes had stopped crying. That was bad. That was really, really bad. "Stay awake," she mumbled, jostling them gently. "Come on. Stay with me." Kieran's eyes fluttered open for a second, then closed again. Caden didn't respond at all. Lyra's vision blurred, from tears or snow she didn't know. She kept walking, and then she saw it. A light, faint and flickering, barely visible through the storm. A cabin. Lyra stumbled toward it, her body moving on pure instinct now. She didn't care who lived there, didn't care if they turned her away or called the guards or slit her throat. She just needed to get the princes somewhere warm. The door was unlocked. Lyra shoved it open and fell inside, landing hard on her knees. The impact sent pain shooting up her legs, but she barely felt it. Warmth. There was warmth. A fire burned in a stone hearth across the room. The cabin was small, one room, sparsely furnished, but dry and blessedly warm. Lyra crawled toward the fire and set the princes down on the floor, unwrapping the wet blankets with numb fingers. "Come on," she whispered. "Come on, wake up." Caden's chest was barely moving. Kieran's skin was cold to the touch. Panic slammed into her. "No, no, no, no!" Lyra rubbed their tiny arms, their legs, trying to get the blood flowing. Wake up! Please wake up. Caden's eyes opened, just a crack. He made a soft sound, not quite a cry, but close. Relief hit her so hard she almost sobbed. Kieran took longer, but eventually his eyes opened too, and he started to whimper. Lyra pulled them both against her chest and held them there, shaking with cold and fear, and something that felt horribly like hope. They were alive. For now. Martin, what the hell are you doing in my house? Lyra's head jerked up. A man stood in the doorway, snow dusting his shoulders, a dead rabbit hanging from one hand. He was tall, taller than the king, with dark hair pulled back in a messy knot and a scar running from his left eyebrow to his jaw. His eyes were gray, sharp, and currently locked on Lyra with an expression somewhere between confusion and anger. Lyra scrambled to her feet, clutching the princes. I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to. You broke into my cabin. The door was unlocked. So that makes it okay? No, Lyra's voice cracked. Please, I'll leave. Just give me a minute to warm them up and I'll go. The man's gaze dropped to the babies in her arms. His expression shifted. Not softening, exactly. But something changed. Those are babies, he said flatly. Yes. You brought babies into a blizzard. I didn't have a choice. Everyone has a choice. He stepped inside and shut the door, cutting off the howling wind. Yours was just stupid. Lyra's jaw tightened. I'm sorry my desperation inconvenienced you. Desperation. The man dropped the rabbit on a table by the door and crossed his arms. That what we're calling it? What else would you call it? Theft, breaking and entering, criminal stupidity. He tilted his head, studying her. You're from the palace. It wasn't a question. Lyra's heart stuttered. How did you... Your clothes, the way you talk, and those... He nodded at the princes. Those are royal blankets, silk and fur. Nobody outside the palace uses those. Lyra's grip tightened on the babies. Are you going to turn me in? The man was quiet for a long moment. Then he walked past her to the fire, grabbed a log from the stack beside it, and tossed it onto the flames. Depends, he said. You going to tell me why you're running through a blizzard with 2 infants who are clearly not yours? They are mine. The words came out harder than she meant them to. The man raised an eyebrow. Really? Yes. You gave birth to twin boys with eyes like that? He gestured at Caden, whose golden gaze was fixed on Lyra's face. Shifter royalty eyes? Lyra didn't answer. The man snorted. That's what I thought. He grabbed a blanket from a chair and tossed it at her. Dry them off. Then yourself. You're dripping all over my floor. I said I'm sorry. And I said dry off. You want to freeze to death, do it outside. Lyra bit back a retort and focused on the princes. She wrapped them in the dry blanket, rubbing their arms and legs until some color started returning to their faces. Kieran was shivering now, which was actually a good sign. Caden was still too quiet, but his breathing was steadier. The man watched her work, his expression unreadable. What's your name? He asked finally. Lyra. You got a last name, Lyra? No. Figures. He pulled out a chair and sat down, stretching his legs toward the fire. I'm Kyle, and before you ask, no, I don't work for the king. No, I'm not going to help you, and no, you can't stay here. Lyra looked up at him. I wasn't going to ask. Good, because the answer's no. He leaned back, his gray eyes hard. I don't know what kind of mess you got yourself into, and I don't care. But the palace doesn't send people into blizzards for no reason. So whatever you did, I didn't do anything. Everyone says that. I'm serious. I didn't... Lyra stopped, her throat tight. I was just trying to keep them safe. Kale studied her for a long moment. Then he sighed and rubbed his face with both hands. Safe from what? Everything. Lyra looked down at the princes. The attack, the king, She stopped herself before she said too much. But Kael's expression had already shifted. The attack, he repeated slowly. You mean the palace is under siege? Lyra nodded. When? Tonight. The southern rebels. They breached the outer walls. Kael swore under his breath. And you ran? Yes. With the royal heirs. Lyra's silence was answer enough. Kale stood up abruptly and started pacing. Do you have any idea what you've done? If the rebels find out the princes are missing, if the king finds out, the king wanted me dead anyway, Lyra said quietly. That stopped him. What? He hates me. Has since the day I walked into the nursery. The only reason I'm alive is because the princes won't let anyone else near them. But when he gets back from the northern territories, he's going to have me executed. So running? She looked up at Kale. Running was the smart choice. Kale stared at her like she'd grown a second head. You're insane, he said finally. Probably. You kidnapped the future kings. I saved them. Same thing in the eyes of the law. He started pacing again. They're going to hunt you. Every soldier, every tracker, every shifter in the kingdom. They'll tear this forest apart looking for those boys. I know. And when they find you, they won't. Lyra's voice was steadier than she felt. Because I'm not going back. Kale stopped pacing and turned to face her fully. Where exactly do you think you're going? He asked. Lyra hesitated. She hadn't thought that far ahead. But now, with Kale staring at her like she was the world's biggest idiot, she forced herself to think. The queen. The real queen. Not the palace, not the advisors, not the king. The woman who'd spent months on the front lines. The warrior who'd won the war and come home to sons who didn't know her. The rebel army, Lyra said. The queen's still with them, isn't she? Leading the defense? Kale's expression went carefully blank. Maybe. I need to find her, get the princes back to her. She'll protect them. She'll have you executed for treason, Kale interrupted. You think she's going to thank you for stealing her children? I didn't steal them. I saved them. Again, same thing. Lyra stood up, still holding the princes, and faced him. Then what was I supposed to do? Let them die in the attack? Let the king lock me in a dungeon and execute me while the boys screamed themselves sick? Kale didn't answer. I made a choice, Lyra continued. Maybe it was the wrong one, but it's done. And now I need to get them to their mother before... A howl cut through the air. Close. Too close. Kale's head snapped toward the door. Wolves? Lyra whispered. Worse. He crossed to the window and peered out into the storm. Soldiers? Lyra's blood went cold. How can you tell? Because wolves don't carry torches. He turned back to her, his expression grim. They're tracking you. Already? Royal heirs go missing during an attack? Yeah, they're not wasting time. He grabbed a pack from the corner and started shoving supplies into it. Dried meat, a water skin, a knife. How much of a head start do you think you have? Lyra's mind raced. I don't know, an hour? Maybe 2? Not enough. Kale slung the pack over his shoulder and grabbed a heavy coat from a hook by the door. They'll be here in 20 minutes, maybe less. Then I'll go. I'll lead them away from here. You'll die in the snow, Kale said flatly. You made it half a mile before you collapsed. You think you're going to outrun trained soldiers? I don't have a choice. Yes, you do. He tossed her the coat. You come with me. Lyra stared at him. What? I know this forest. I know places they won't find. If you want to get those boys to the rebel camp alive, you need a guide. He opened the door, and the wind roared in. So make up your mind. Stay here and get caught, or follow me and maybe, you survive the night. Lyra looked down at the princes, at their tiny, trusting faces. Then she pulled on the coat and followed Kale into the storm. The forest was a nightmare. Snow fell so thick Lyra could barely see Kale's back. The wind tore at her clothes, her hair, her skin. Her feet were numb again within minutes. The princes were crying, quiet, exhausted sobs that broke her heart. But Kale kept moving, his pace relentless, and Lyra forced herself to keep up. They moved in silence for what felt like hours. No talking, no stopping, just endless trudging through snow that got deeper with every step. Behind them, the torches grew brighter. The soldiers were gaining. They're getting closer, Lyra gasped. I know. We need to move faster. We're already moving as fast as you can handle. Kale glanced back at her, his expression hard. If you want to go faster, give me one of the kids. Lyra's arms tightened around the princes. No. Then stop complaining and keep moving. She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him to go to hell, but she didn't have the breath. So she just kept walking. They reached a ravine just as the torches crested the hill behind them. Lyra stared down at the drop, at least 30 feet, maybe more, the bottom hidden in shadow and snow. "We can't cross that," she said. "We're not crossing it." Cale grabbed her arm and pulled her toward a narrow path that ran along the edge. "We're going around." "That's not a path. That's a death trap." "It's a path if you don't fall off." He started moving, his boots finding purchase on the icy stone. "Watch where you step. Don't look down. And for the love of, don't drop the babies." Lyra's heart was hammering so hard she thought it might burst. But the soldiers were close. She could hear them shouting now, their voices carrying over the wind. She took a breath and stepped onto the path. The stone was slick with ice. Her foot slipped immediately, and she slammed against the rock wall, barely catching herself. The princes screamed. "Quiet," Kael hissed. "They'll hear." "I can't." "Yes, you can. Move." Lyra forced herself forward. One step, then another. Her whole body was shaking. The ravine yawned to her left, dark and hungry. Halfway across, her foot slipped again. This time, she didn't catch herself. She fell. Her shoulder slammed into the rock, pain exploding through her arm. She twisted, trying to shield the princes, and felt herself start to slide toward the edge. A hand grabbed her coat. Cale hauled her back up, his grip bruising, his face inches from hers. "I said don't fall," he growled. Lyra couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. "Move," Kael said again. "Now." She moved. They made it across just as the soldiers reached the ravine. Kael pulled her into the trees, pressing a hand over her mouth when she started to gasp for air. "Quiet," he breathed. Lyra nodded. They crouched there, hidden in the shadows, as the soldiers stood at the edge of the path. "They came this way," one of them said. "Tracks lead right to the edge." "Think they tried to cross? In this storm? They'd be dead." "Check anyway. The king wants those boys back, alive." Two soldiers started across the path, slow, careful. Kael's hand tightened on Lyra's shoulder. One of the soldiers slipped. He caught himself, swearing, and kept moving. Lyra held her breath. The princes mercifully stayed quiet. The soldiers made it across and disappeared into the trees on the other side. After a long moment, the rest of the group followed. Kael waited until the torches were out of sight. Then he stood, pulling Lyra up with him. "We need to move," he said. "They'll figure out we doubled back eventually." "Where are we going?" "Safe house. About 3 miles north. We can rest there, regroup." Lyra looked down at the princes. They were both awake now, staring up at her with wide, confused eyes. Can we make 3 miles?" she asked quietly. Kael looked at her, really looked at her, at the exhaustion in her face, the way her legs were shaking, the blood seeping through her sleeve from where she'd hit the rock. "We have to," he said. And they did. What? The safe house turned out to be a cave. A small, damp, freezing cave with a single narrow entrance and no fire. Lyra sank to the ground, her legs finally giving out, and leaned against the stone wall. Kael dropped the pack and started pulling out supplies. "We can't risk a fire. Smoke would give us away." "I know. And we can't stay here long. A day, maybe 2. Then we move again." "I know." Kael stopped and looked at her. "You're bleeding." Lyra glanced at her shoulder. The coat was torn, and blood had soaked through her shirt underneath. "It's fine," she said. "It's not fine. Let me see." "I said it's fine." Kael crossed his arms. "You're going to bleed out and leave me stuck with 2 screaming infants. So let me see the damn shoulder." Lyra was too tired to argue. She shifted the princes to one arm, they were asleep again somehow, and shrugged off the coat. Kael knelt beside her and peeled back her shirt. He hissed through his teeth. "That's deep. I'll survive." "Not if it gets infected." He pulled a flask from his pack and uncorked it. "This is going to hurt." "What is it?" He poured it over the wound. Lyra bit down on her lip hard enough to taste blood, her vision going white with pain. "Told you," Kael muttered. He pulled out a strip of cloth and wrapped it around her shoulder, his movements efficient and practiced. "You'll live, but you need to take it easy." Can't. Lyra's voice was hoarse. We need to keep moving. Not tonight. Tonight we rest. Tomorrow we figure out the next step. Lyra leaned her head back against the wall and closed her eyes. For the first time in hours, the adrenaline was fading, and underneath it was exhaustion so deep it felt like drowning. Why are you helping me? She asked quietly. Kale was silent for a moment. I don't know, he admitted. Probably because I'm as stupid as you are. Despite everything, Lyra almost smiled. The king's going to kill you for this, she said. Yeah, probably. Kale settled against the opposite wall, his arms crossed. But the king can get in line. There's a lot of people who want me dead. Why? Long story, and not one I'm telling tonight. He tipped his head back, his eyes closing. Get some sleep. We move at first light. Lyra wanted to argue, wanted to ask more questions, wanted to demand answers. But the princes were warm against her chest, and her body was shutting down whether she liked it or not. So she closed her eyes. And for the first time since the attack, she slept. She woke to screaming. Not the princes, something else. Lyra's eyes flew open. The cave was dark, the entrance barely visible in the pre-dawn gray, and outside, wolves, real ones, a whole pack from the sound of it. Kyle was already on his feet, a knife in his hand. Stay back, he said quietly. What are they doing? Hunting. Us? Probably. Lyra's heart kicked into overdrive. She pulled the princes closer, their small bodies stirring but not waking. The howling got louder. Closer. And then, suddenly, it stopped. Kyle went still. Lyra held her breath. Silence. Then a new sound. Footsteps. Heavy. Human. They're not alone, Kyle whispered. A voice called out from the darkness. We know you're in there. Come out. Bring the princes. No one has to die tonight. Lyra's stomach dropped. Soldiers. Kale swore under his breath. How many? Lyra whispered. At least 6. Maybe more. He looked at her, his expression grim. They found us. What do we do? We fight. I can't fight. I don't have a wolf. I don't have... Then you run. Kale pressed something into her hand. A small knife, the blade worn but sharp. There's a back way out. Small, tight, but you'll fit. When I give the signal, you go. Don't look back. Don't stop. Just run. What about you? I'll buy you time. Kyle, go! He moved toward the entrance, and Lyra saw it, the shift in his stance, the way his eyes changed. He was going to fight. He was going to die. For her. For 2 babies he didn't even know. Lyra wanted to argue, wanted to tell him to run with her, but the princes were stirring now, starting to fuss, and outside the soldiers were moving closer. Last chance, the voice called. Come out, or we come in. Kyle looked back at her one last time. Go! Lyra ran. She found the opening at the back of the cave, barely wide enough for her body, and squeezed through, the princes clutched tight against her chest. Behind her she heard Kyle roar, heard the clash of steel, heard men screaming, and then she was outside, stumbling into the snow, her legs shaking, her vision blurred with tears. She ran. But she'd barely made it 10 steps when something slammed into her from behind. Lyra hit the ground hard. The princes flew from her arms. She screamed. A soldier stood over her, his sword drawn, his face hidden behind a helmet. Got her, he shouted. Lyra scrambled toward the babies, her hands clawing at the snow. The soldier grabbed her by the hair and yanked her back. And then, a sound. Low, guttural, inhuman. Lyra looked up. The princes were changing, their small bodies contorted, fur rippling across their skin, bones cracking and reshaping. Within seconds, 2 wolf pups stood where the babies had been. Their eyes, still golden, locked on the soldier. And they snarled. The soldier stumbled back. What the? The pups attacked. They were small, clumsy, but they were fast. One latched onto the soldier's leg. The other went for his arm. The man screamed and fell, his sword clattering to the ground. Lyra stared, her mind blank with shock. The pups, the princes. They'd shifted. They were 4 months old. That was impossible. Shifters didn't get their wolves until puberty. Everyone knew that. But the proof was right in front of her, snarling and snapping at a soldier twice their size. More soldiers were coming. Lyra could hear them. She forced herself to move, grabbed the pups, both of them squirming and growling in her arms, and ran. She didn't know where she was going, didn't care. She just ran. And behind her, the forest exploded into chaos. The pups wouldn't shift back. Lyra had been running for hours, stumbling through snow, tripping over roots, her lungs screaming for air, and the princes were still wolves, small, furry, impossibly fast wolves that kept trying to wriggle out of her arms. She'd tried everything, talking to them, begging them, even shaking them gently, hoping it would snap them out of whatever instinct had taken over. Nothing worked. They just stared at her with those golden eyes and whined. The forest had gone quiet behind her. No more soldiers shouting, no more torches. Either they'd given up the chase, or they were tracking her silently. Lyra didn't know which was worse. Her shoulder was bleeding again. She could feel the wet warmth soaking through the bandage Kael had wrapped. Her feet were so numb she couldn't tell if she was still walking or just dragging herself forward on frozen stumps. And Kael, she didn't know if he was alive. The thought made her chest ache, but she shoved it down. She couldn't think about that now, couldn't afford to fall apart. The pups needed her. She kept moving. Dawn came slow and gray, the sun hidden behind thick clouds that promised more snow. Lyra found a hollow tree and crawled inside, pulling the pups with her. It wasn't warm, it wasn't safe, but it was shelter, and that was more than she'd had all night. The pups immediately curled up against her, their small bodies radiating heat. One of them, Caden, she thought, based on the darker fur, licked her hand. "You need to change back," Lyra whispered. "I don't know how to take care of you like this." Caden just tilted his head, his ears perked. Kieran yawned, showing tiny sharp teeth, and closed his eyes. Lyra leaned back against the tree and tried not to cry. She was so tired, so cold, so completely out of her depth. She'd thought running was the right choice, thought she could protect them, but now she was lost in a forest full of soldiers and wolves, and who knew what else. With 2 babies who turned into animals and wouldn't turn back. What the hell was she supposed to do now? A branch snapped outside the hollow. Lyra's hand flew to the knife Kael had given her. The pups' ears perked up, and they started to growl, low, rumbling sounds that seemed too big for their small bodies. "Easy," Lyra breathed. "Quiet." The pups didn't listen. Footsteps crunched through the snow. Heavy, deliberate. Lyra's heart hammered. A shadow fell across the entrance to the hollow. "You're a hard woman to track." Lyra's breath caught. Kael stood there, alive and bleeding, his coat torn and his face covered in bruises, but alive. "You're—" Lyra's voice cracked. "I thought you were dead." "Not yet." He crouched down and peered into the hollow, his gray eyes scanning her face. "You look like hell." "You're not much better." "Fair." He glanced at the pups, and his eyebrows went up. "They're still shifted. I can't get them to change back." "Have you tried asking nicely?" "Yes," Lyra snapped. "I've tried everything." Kael studied the pups for a moment. Then he reached out slowly, letting them sniff his hand. Caden growled. Kieran just watched. "They're stuck," Kael said finally. "What do you mean, stuck?" "They're too young to control it. Shifting at 4 months old, that's not normal. Hell, it's not even possible. But they did it anyway, and now their bodies don't know how to shift back." He pulled his hand away. "They'll figure it out eventually, or they won't." "That's not helpful." "It's the truth." Kael sat back on his heels. "We need to move. I lost the soldiers for now, but they'll pick up the trail again soon." "I can barely walk." "Then I'll carry you." "You're injured." "So are you, but we don't have a choice." He stood up and offered her his hand. "Come on. We're only a day from the rebel camp if we push hard." Lyra stared at his hand. "You're really going to help me get there? After everything?" "I've come this far, haven't I?" Kyle's expression softened, just slightly. "Besides, those boys saved my life back at the cave. Figure I owe them." Lyra took his hand. They moved slowly, Lyra's legs were shaking so badly she could barely stand, and Kael wasn't much better. But he kept his word. When she stumbled, he caught her. When she fell, he pulled her up. And when she finally collapsed, unable to take another step, he slung her over his shoulder and kept walking. The pups trotted alongside them, their small legs working overtime to keep pace. Every so often, one of them would stop and howl, a thin, pitiful sound that made Lyra's heart clench. "They're calling for their mother," Kael said quietly. "Can she hear them?" "If she's close enough. Shifter bonds are strong, even at this age." He glanced down at Caden, who was staring up at him with wide, curious eyes. "Your mother's going to lose her mind when she sees what you did." Lyra didn't respond. She was too focused on staying conscious. The world had started to blur at the edges. Colors bled together. Sounds became muffled and distant. She was freezing, or burning. She couldn't tell anymore. "Lyra," Kael's voice cut through the fog. "Stay awake. We're almost there." "Almost where?" "The camp." Lyra tried to lift her head, but it felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "I don't see anything." "That's the point. It's hidden." Kael shifted her weight on his shoulder. "Just stay with me a little longer, please." There was something in his voice, something she hadn't heard before. Fear. She forced her eyes open and saw the camp. It wasn't what she expected. There were no tents, no banners, no obvious signs of an army. Just a network of caves carved into the side of a cliff, hidden behind trees and snow and clever camouflage. Fires burned deep inside the caves, their light barely visible from the outside. Guards stood watch at the entrances, their eyes sharp and their weapons drawn. Kael carried her straight to the largest cave. "I need a healer," he shouted. "Now!" People started moving immediately. Lyra caught glimpses of faces, hard, weathered, suspicious. Soldiers, all of them. Veterans. A woman appeared, older, with gray hair and scars across her hands. "What happened?" she demanded. "Frostbite, blood loss, possible infection." Kael set Lyra down on a bedroll near the fire. "And before you ask, no, she's not one of ours, but she's got something the Queen needs to see." The healer's eyes narrowed. "What?" Kael stepped aside, and the pups walked into the firelight. The entire cave went silent. The healer's face went white. "Those are the princes," Kael confirmed. "Yeah." Someone swore. Another person gasped, and then a voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Where did you find them?" Lyra turned her head, too fast, making her vision spin, and saw the Queen. She looked different than she had in the palace, harder, thinner. Her armor was battered, her face streaked with dirt and dried blood. But her eyes, those storm gray eyes, were exactly the same. And they were locked on the pups. "Your Majesty," Kael said, dropping to one knee. "I found them in the forest, with her." He nodded at Lyra. The Queen crossed the cave in 3 long strides and dropped to her knees in front of the pups. "Caden," she whispered. "Kieran." The pups stared at her. Then, slowly, Caden took a step forward. He sniffed her hand, and his tail wagged. The Queen's face crumpled. She pulled both pups into her arms, her whole body shaking, and buried her face in their fur. "I thought you were dead," she choked out. "I thought, when the palace burned, I thought I'd lost you." The pups whined softly, nuzzling against her. And Lyra, watching from the bedroll, her vision blurring with tears, felt something crack open inside her chest. This was what she'd been running toward. This moment. This reunion. The princes were safe. They were with their mother. Her job was done. The healer worked quickly, cleaning Lyra's wounds and wrapping her shoulder in fresh bandages. She didn't speak, didn't ask questions, just worked with the efficiency of someone who'd seen too much blood to be shocked by it anymore. Lyra barely felt it. She was too focused on the Queen, who was still holding the pups, whispering to them in a language Lyra didn't understand. After a while, the Queen looked up. Her eyes found Lyra. "You," she said quietly. Lyra's throat tightened. "Your Majesty." The Queen stood, still holding the pups, and crossed to the bedroll. "You took my sons," she said. "I saved them. You ran from the palace during an attack. You stole the future heirs of the kingdom. You put their lives in danger. I kept them alive. Lyra's voice cracked. The palace was burning. The soldiers were everywhere. If I'd stayed, they would have died. Or worse. Worse than freezing to death in a forest? Yes. Lyra pushed herself up, ignoring the pain in her shoulder. The king was going to kill me. Do you understand that? He wanted me dead. And the moment he found out I'd been alone with the princes during the attack, he would have blamed me, executed me. And then what? Who would have calmed them? Who would have kept them safe? The queen's jaw tightened. You don't know that. Yes, I do. Lyra's eyes burned. Because he told me. He looked me in the face and said I was nothing, a mistake, a placeholder. And the moment he could replace me, I was gone. The cave was silent. The queen stared at her for a long moment. Then she set the pups down gently and sat on the edge of the bedroll. Tell me everything, she said, from the beginning. So Lyra did. She told her about the attack, about the ceiling collapsing, about running through the snow with no plan and no hope, about Kael finding her and helping her, about the soldiers and the wolves and the moment the princes shifted. The queen listened without interrupting. Her expression didn't change, but her hands, resting on her knees, were shaking. When Lyra finished, the queen was quiet for a long time. Then she said, They shifted at 4 months old. Yes, that's impossible. I know. But you saw it happen. Yes. The queen looked down at the pups who were curled up by the fire, asleep. They're stuck, aren't they? They can't shift back. Kael said they're too young to control it. Kael's right. The queen exhaled slowly. They'll figure it out eventually, or a healer will have to force the shift. Either way, she stopped, her voice catching. Either way, they're alive because of you. Lyra didn't know what to say to that. The queen stood up and looked down at her. You risked your life for my sons. You had every reason to leave them behind and save yourself. But you didn't. I couldn't, Lyra said quietly. They needed me. And you needed them. The queen's expression softened. I saw it in the palace, the way you looked at them, like they were yours. Lyra's throat closed up. I was angry, the queen admitted. Jealous, even. My own children preferred a wolfless servant over me. Do you know how that felt? I'm sorry. Don't be. The queen knelt down, her eyes level with Lyra's. You gave them something I couldn't. Stability, consistency, love. She paused. And now you've given them their lives. That's not something I can repay. Lyra shook her head. I don't want repayment. Her voice cracked. I just want them to be safe. The queen studied her for a moment. Then she did something Lyra never expected. She pulled her into a hug. It was brief, awkward, but real. Thank you, the queen whispered, for everything. Lyra couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. She just nodded. The healer insisted Lyra rest, but Lyra couldn't sleep. She lay on the bedroll, staring at the cave ceiling, listening to the sounds of the camp around her. Soldiers talking, fires crackling, the occasional howl from the pups. Kael appeared sometime after dark, carrying 2 bowls of stew. You need to eat, he said, handing her one. Lyra took it, but didn't touch the food. Where were you? Talking to the queen, giving her the full story. He sat down beside her, his movements stiff. She's calling a council meeting tomorrow, wants to figure out what to do next. About the princes? About you. Lyra's stomach dropped. What do you mean? You're a liability, Lyra. You took the royal heirs without permission. Technically, that's treason. The queen might have forgiven you, but the council... He shook his head. They're not as understanding. So what? They're going to execute me anyway? No. Kael's voice was firm. The queen won't let that happen. But they might exile you, send you somewhere far away where you can't cause any more trouble. Lyra looked down at her bowl. Maybe that's for the best? You don't mean that. Don't I? She set the bowl aside. I've caused nothing but problems since the day I walked into that nursery. The princes, the king, the queen, everyone's lives would be easier if I just disappeared. Kael grabbed her arm, forcing her to look at him. Those boys are alive because of you. Don't forget that. They're alive because you helped me. I helped because you didn't give up, even when you should have. His grip tightened. You're stronger than you think, Lyra, and smarter and braver. Don't let anyone, especially not yourself, tell you otherwise. Lyra's eyes burned. Why do you care? She whispered. Kael was quiet for a moment. Then he let go of her arm and looked away. Because someone should, he said finally. The council meeting happened at dawn. Lyra was escorted to a smaller cave, her wrists bound, not tightly but enough to make the point. She was a prisoner, a criminal. The queen sat at the head of a makeshift table, surrounded by advisors and commanders. Kael stood off to the side, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. And at the queen's feet, the pups sat, still in wolf form, still watching everything with those two intelligent eyes. One of the advisors, a tall man with a scar across his throat, stood up. We're here to discuss the matter of Lyra, he said, a wolfless servant who took the royal heirs without permission during a time of war. She saved their lives, the queen interjected, or she endangered them. The advisor's gaze was cold. We have no proof she didn't orchestrate the attack herself. No proof she's not working with the rebels who sieged the palace. That's insane, Kael said sharply. She was running from the soldiers, not with them. You're biased. You helped her. And I'd do it again. The advisor ignored him and turned to the queen. Your Majesty, with all respect, this woman is a threat. She's unvetted, untrustworthy, and unnaturally bonded to your sons. We recommend exile, permanent. The queen's jaw tightened. And I recommend you remember who you're speaking to. The advisor blinked. Your Majesty, Lyra saved my children. She risked her life multiple times to bring them back to me. And you want to punish her for that? We want to protect the kingdom. The kingdom needs people like her. The queen stood, her voice hard. People who act when others freeze. People who choose courage over convenience. She looked at Lyra. I'm not exiling her, and I'm not punishing her. She stays. With the princes. Where she belongs. The cave erupted into argument. Advisors shouted. Commanders protested. But the queen didn't flinch. This discussion is over, she said. Lyra stays. That's final. The advisors fell silent, their faces tight with disapproval. The queen turned to Lyra. You're free to go. Lyra stared at her, stunned. Your Majesty. Don't make me repeat myself. A guard stepped forward and cut the bindings on Lyra's wrists. Lyra rubbed her wrists, her mind spinning. She was free. She was safe. She was... The pups tackled her, both of them, all at once, knocking her backward onto the ground. They licked her face, their tails wagging furiously, and Lyra, despite everything, started to laugh. Okay, she gasped. I missed you too. The queen smiled, and for the first time since the attack, Lyra let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be okay. But that night, everything changed. Lyra woke to shouting, to the clash of steel, to the smell of smoke. The camp was under attack. She scrambled out of bed, grabbing the pups, and stumbled toward the cave entrance. Soldiers poured through the trees. Not rebels, not allies. The king's men. And leading them, his face twisted with rage, was the Alpha King himself. His eyes found Lyra across the chaos. And he smiled. There you are, he said. Lyra's blood turned to ice. The queen appeared beside her, her sword drawn. Get the boys to safety, now. Your Majesty, go! Lyra ran, but she didn't get far. A hand grabbed her from behind, yanking her backward. The pups flew from her arms, hitting the ground hard. She screamed, and then a voice, cold, familiar, hateful, spoke in her ear. Did you really think you could run from me? The king growled. Lyra twisted, trying to break free, but his grip was iron. I should have killed you the day you touched my sons, he said, but I'll fix that mistake now. He raised his sword, and then the pups attacked. They were small, young, untrained, but they were furious. They latched onto the king's legs, their teeth sinking deep, and he roared with pain. The queen charged forward, her blade flashing, and Lyra, bleeding, terrified, shaking, grabbed the knife Kael had given her. She didn't think. She just moved. The blade sank into the king's side. Not deep, not fatal, but enough. The The king staggered back, his eyes wide with shock. "You!" he choked. The queen's sword found his throat. "You're done," she said coldly. And then she struck. The king fell, and the camp erupted into cheers. Lyra collapsed. Kale caught her before she hit the ground, his arms strong and steady. "You did it," he said, his voice rough. "It's over." Lyra looked up at him, her vision blurring. "Is it?" Kale smiled. "Yeah, it is." The pups climbed into her lap, whining softly, and Lyra held them close. The queen knelt beside her, her face streaked with blood and tears. "You saved us," she said. "Again." Lyra shook her head. "We saved each other." The queen smiled, and for the first time in her life, Lyra felt like she belonged. The battle ended before dawn. The king's soldiers, leaderless, demoralized, surrendered or fled into the forest. The rebel camp erupted in celebration, soldiers shouting and embracing, their voices hoarse with relief and disbelief. But Lyra didn't celebrate. She sat on the ground beside the queen, the pups curled in her lap, and stared at the body of the Alpha King. His eyes were still open, frozen in shock. Blood pooled beneath him, dark and spreading. She'd helped kill him. The knife was still in her hand, sticky with blood. "Lyra," the queen's voice cut through the fog. "Look at me." Lyra couldn't. "You did what you had to do," the queen said firmly. "He would have killed you, killed the boys, killed me. You saved us." "I killed him," Lyra whispered. "No, I killed him. You defended yourself. There's a difference." Was there? Lyra wasn't sure anymore. Kale crouched beside her and gently pried the knife from her fingers. "Come on, let's get you cleaned up." Lyra let him pull her to her feet. The pups whined, clinging to her legs, and she scooped them up automatically. They were shaking, both of them. She held them tighter. The camp was chaos around them. Soldiers dragging bodies, healers tending to the wounded, commanders barking orders. But Lyra felt separate from all of it, like she was watching through glass. "She's in shock," someone said. "A healer, maybe." "Get her somewhere warm." Kale's arm slipped around her waist, supporting her weight. "I've got her." They moved through the camp slowly. Lyra's legs felt like they belonged to someone else. The pups were heavy in her arms, their small bodies radiating warmth, and she focused on that, on the feeling of them, the realness of them. Not on the king's face, not on the blood. Not on the way his body had gone slack when the queen's blade found his throat. The healers set up a tent for her, a real one this time, with thick canvas walls and a brazier for warmth. Kyle stayed outside, guarding the entrance, while a young healer named Senna washed the blood from Lyra's hands and arms. "You're in shock," Senna said quietly. "It'll pass. But you need to rest." "I'm fine." "You're not." Senna wrapped a blanket around Lyra's shoulders. "But you will be. Give it time." Time. Like that would fix anything. The pups were still wolves. They'd been shifted for 2 days now, and nothing the healers tried could coax them back into human form. They ate scraps of meat from Lyra's hands and slept pressed against her side, their small bodies twitching with dreams. Lyra wondered if they understood what had happened, if they knew their father was dead, if they cared. She looked down at them, at Caden's dark fur and Kieran's lighter coat, and felt her chest tighten. They were so small, so vulnerable. They defended her with teeth and claws and fury, but they were still babies, still helpless in so many ways. "What happens now?" Lyra asked quietly. Senna paused in her work. "What do you mean?" "The king is dead. The kingdom's without a ruler. What happens to them?" She gestured at the pups. "The queen will take the throne. She's already won the loyalty of the rebel army. The nobles will have no choice but to accept her." "And the princes?" "They'll be heirs, protected, raised to rule." Senna's expression softened. "And you'll be there to help raise them. The queen already said as much." Lyra's throat closed up. "She shouldn't trust me with that. I'm nobody." "You're the woman who saved her sons twice. That makes you somebody." Senna finished cleaning Lyra's hands and sat back. "Try to rest. Tomorrow's going to be long." She left before Lyra could argue. Lyra lay down on the bedroll, the pups immediately curling against her stomach. She wrapped her arms around them and closed her eyes. But sleep didn't come. Every time she started to drift off, she saw the king's face, heard the wet sound of steel cutting flesh, felt the weight of the knife in her hand. She'd killed someone. No, she'd helped kill someone. Did that make it better? Did that make it forgivable? Lyra didn't know. She just knew that something inside her had changed. Something had hardened, and she wasn't sure if that was a good thing or a terrible one. The queen came to see her that evening. She looked exhausted, her face pale, her eyes red-rimmed, her hair loose and tangled, but she moved with purpose, her shoulders straight, her chin up. A queen in every sense of the word. "How are you?" the queen asked, sitting down across from Lyra. "I don't know." The queen nodded. "That's fair." They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the crackling of the brazier and the soft breathing of the sleeping pups. "The council wants to return to the palace," the queen said finally. "Now that the king is dead, the kingdom needs leadership, stability." Lyra's stomach twisted. "You're leaving? We're all leaving, including you." Lyra looked up sharply. "What? You're coming with us, you and the boys." The queen's gaze was steady. "I need you, Lyra. They need you." "Your Majesty, I can't." "Why not?" "Because I'm—" Lyra gestured vaguely at herself. "I'm nobody. A servant. A wolfless girl who doesn't belong in a palace. You're the woman who saved my sons, twice." The queen leaned forward. "You think rank matters to me? Blood? Status? It doesn't. Not anymore. What matters is loyalty, courage, and you've shown more of both than anyone in my court." Lyra's throat tightened. "The advisors will never accept me." "Then they can leave." The queen's voice hardened. "I'm done letting other people dictate what my family needs. The boys trust you. I trust you. That's enough." "What about—" Lyra hesitated. "What about the truth? About who I am? Where I came from?" The queen's expression shifted. Something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, maybe, or guilt. "We need to talk about that," she said quietly. "But not here. Not now. When we get back to the palace, there's something I need to show you." Lyra wanted to ask what, wanted to demand answers, but the queen stood up, signaling the conversation was over. "Pack your things," she said. "We leave at first light." The journey back to the palace took 3 days. The snow had stopped, but the cold lingered, biting through clothes and skin. The rebels moved in formation, soldiers flanking the queen and the princes, who were still in wolf form, riding in a makeshift carrier on Lyra's back. Kyle walked beside her most of the way, his presence steady and grounding. "You're quiet," he said on the second day. "I'm tired." "That's not it." Lyra glanced at him. "What do you want me to say?" "I don't know. That you're scared? Relieved? Angry?" He shrugged. "Anything other than this blank-faced thing you've been doing since the battle?" "I killed someone, Kale." "You defended yourself." "It's the same thing." "It's not." He stopped walking, forcing her to stop too. "Listen to me. The king was a monster. He terrorized his own people. He treated you like garbage. And when you finally stood up to him, he tried to kill you. You didn't start that fight, Lyra. You just finished it. That doesn't make it easier." "I know." His voice softened. "But it does make it right." Lyra wanted to believe him. She really did. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw the king's face. The shock. The blood. The way he'd looked at her in those final seconds. Not with rage, but with something worse. Recognition. Like he'd seen something in her he hadn't expected. "He knew," Lyra said suddenly. Kale frowned. "Knew what?" "Something. When he looked at me, right before the queen struck, he knew something." Her hands tightened on the carrier's straps. "Like he recognized me." "Maybe he did. You were in his palace for months. He probably remembered your face." "No, it was more than that." Lyra shook her head. "I can't explain it, but there was something in his eyes, something that felt like—" She stopped. "Like what?" Kyle pressed. "Like he was seeing a ghost." Kyle was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "The Queen's going to tell you something when you get back. Something big. I can feel it." "How do you know?" "Because I've seen that look before. The guilt. The weight of a secret." He started walking again. Whatever it is, it's been eating at her for a long time. Lyra's chest tightened. "I'm not sure I want to know." "Probably not, but you need to anyway." They walked in silence after that, the snow crunching under their boots, the pups dozing in their carrier. The palace was a ruin. The outer walls were scorched black from the fire. Half the towers had collapsed. The courtyard was littered with debris, broken stone, shattered glass, the charred remains of furniture and tapestries. But the inner keep had survived. Damaged, yes, but still standing. The Queen walked through the gates like she owned them, which, Lyra supposed, she did now. The soldiers who'd stayed behind to guard the ruins dropped to their knees as she passed. "Your Majesty," one of them said, his voice shaking. We heard the king. The king is dead," the Queen said flatly. "I rule now. Get up. There's work to do." The soldiers scrambled to their feet, already barking orders at each other. Lyra followed the Queen through the destroyed hallways, the pups whining softly in their carrier. Everything looked wrong, familiar but broken, like a memory that didn't quite fit anymore. They passed the nursery, or what was left of it. The door hung off its hinges. The cribs were overturned. Soot covered the walls. Lyra's chest ached looking at it. This was where it had started, where the princes had first reached for her, where she'd become something more than a servant. Now it was ash and ruin. "We'll rebuild it," the Queen said quietly, noticing where Lyra was looking. "Better than before." Lyra nodded, not trusting her voice. They stopped outside the royal chambers, or what was left of them. The Queen pushed open the door and stepped inside. Lyra hesitated. "Come on," the Queen said. "There's something you need to see." Lyra followed. The room was mostly intact. The bed was still there, the heavy wooden frame blackened but whole. The wardrobe had toppled over, spilling silks and furs across the floor. And on the far wall, a portrait. Lyra's breath caught. It was a family portrait. The king and queen, younger, standing side by side. And between them, a little girl. She had dark hair, golden eyes, and a face that looked achingly familiar. Lyra stared at the portrait, her heart pounding. "That's you," the Queen said quietly. Lyra's legs went weak. "What?" "That's you, Lyra. When you were 3 years old." "No, that's not possible. I'm not—" "You're the king's daughter." The Queen's voice was steady, but sad. "His firstborn, born before the twins, before me." Lyra couldn't breathe, couldn't think. "You're lying." "I'm not." The Queen crossed to a chest in the corner and pulled out a bundle of cloth. She unwrapped it carefully, revealing a small silver bracelet. "This was yours. Your mother gave it to you the day she died." She held it out. Lyra took it with shaking hands. The bracelet was delicate, engraved with symbols she didn't recognize. But the moment she touched it, something inside her shifted, like a door opening, like a memory surfacing, a woman's face, soft, kind, smiling. "My little star." Lyra's knees buckled. The Queen caught her before she hit the floor, lowering her gently to sit on the edge of the bed. "Easy," the Queen murmured. "I know this is a lot." "Why?" Lyra's voice cracked. "Why didn't anyone tell me? Why did he—" "Because you were born without a wolf." The Queen's expression was grim. "In this kingdom, that's a death sentence for royalty. The king couldn't have a defective heir. It would have been seen as weakness, a curse on the bloodline. So he threw me away." The words felt like stones in Lyra's mouth. "Because I wasn't good enough." "Yes." The Queen sat beside her. "Your mother, the king's first wife. She begged him to let you live, promised she'd hide you, raise you in secret. But he refused, said you had to die." Lyra's hands were shaking so badly the bracelet slipped from her fingers. The Queen caught it. "Your mother made a deal with one of the servants," the Queen continued. "A woman named Mira. She agreed to take you, raise you as her own, and never speak of your origins. In exchange, your mother gave her gold, protection, a future for her family. What happened to my mother? The queen's expression darkened. She died 6 months later. Officially, it was an illness, but there were rumors. She stopped, her jaw tight. The king wanted to remarry, wanted sons with wolves. Your mother was in the way. He killed her. It wasn't a question. I don't know for certain, but I suspect. The queen looked at the portrait. By the time I married him, you were already gone, hidden, erased. I didn't know you existed until I found this portrait 2 years ago, tucked away in a storage room. Why didn't you say anything? Because I didn't know who you were. The servant who raised you, Mira, she died when you were young. The other servants who knew the truth were either dead or too scared to talk. I searched for months trying to find the girl in the portrait, and then, the queen's voice caught. Then my sons were born, and you walked into the nursery, and the moment I saw you with them, I knew. Lyra looked up sharply. You knew. Not consciously, but something felt right. The way they responded to you, the way you looked at them, it felt like family. The queen reached out and took Lyra's hand. I had the healers run tests while you were sleeping, blood tests. The results came back 3 weeks ago. And you didn't tell me? I wanted to, but I needed to be sure, needed to have proof. And I needed the king gone before I could say anything. Because if he'd found out, she didn't finish. She didn't have to. Lyra stared down at the bracelet in the queen's hand. She was a princess, a forgotten, discarded, erased princess. But a princess nonetheless. I don't want it, she said quietly. The queen blinked. What? The title, the recognition. I don't want it. Lyra, I'm serious. Lyra stood up, her legs still shaking but her voice steady. I've spent my whole life being invisible, being nothing, and yeah, that was hard, but it also made me who I am. If I take that title, if I become a princess, I lose that. I become someone else. You'd still be you. Would I? Lyra shook her head. The nobles would see me as a threat, a rival to the princes. They'd never accept me. And the people, the wolfless people I want to help, they wouldn't trust me anymore. I'd be one of the royals who threw them away. The queen stood, her expression conflicted. So what do you want? Lyra thought about it. About the merchant and his daughter. About all the children who felt broken and worthless. About the girl she used to be. I want to help, she said finally. I want to stay with the boys, raise them, teach them. But I don't want a crown, I don't want a title, I just want… Her voice cracked. I just want to matter, to make a difference, to prove that people like me aren't worthless. The queen studied her for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. All right, she said. No title, no crown, but you'll be recognized as part of this family. The boys deserve to know who you are. And so does the kingdom. I can live with that, the queen smiled. Good, because I wasn't giving you a choice. Despite everything, Lyra almost laughed. But the coronation happened 2 weeks later. The great hall had been cleared of debris and draped in black and silver banners. Nobles from across the kingdom gathered, some supportive, some skeptical, all curious. The queen stood at the front, dressed in armor and a crown of steel. Beside her, 2 small boys in ceremonial robes fidgeted and squirmed. The princes had finally shifted back 3 days ago. It had happened suddenly, in the middle of the night. One moment they were wolves, the next they were screaming babies again. The healers said it was a miracle. Lyra just thought they'd figured out how to let go. Now they stood beside their mother, holding hands, their golden eyes scanning the crowd. Caden saw Lyra first. His face lit up, and he yanked his hand free from Kieran's, toddling toward her on unsteady legs. The crowd gasped. Lyra crouched down and caught him, pulling him into her arms. Kieran followed immediately, clinging to her leg. The nobles whispered. The queen stepped forward and raised her hand for silence. I know there are questions, she said, her voice carrying across the hall. About the attack, about the king, about the woman you see before you. She gestured to Lyra. This is Lyra, the king's firstborn daughter, hidden and discarded because she was born without a wolf. But she is also the woman who saved my sons, who risked her life to bring them back to me, who proved that strength comes not from power, but from heart. The whispers grew louder. From this day forward, the queen continued, Lyra will serve as the royal guardian to the princes. She will have a place in this court, a voice in this kingdom, and anyone who challenges that. Her gaze swept the room, hard and unyielding. Challenges me. The hall fell silent. Then, slowly, one of the nobles stepped forward and bowed. Another followed, then another. Within moments, the entire hall was bowing. Lyra stood there, holding the princes, tears streaming down her face. The queen walked over and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Welcome home," she said quietly. Lyra couldn't speak. She just nodded, holding the boys tighter, and let herself believe for the first time in her life that she belonged. The celebration lasted 3 days. There was food, real food, not scraps or rations, music, dancing, laughter that echoed through the rebuilt halls. Lyra spent most of it in the nursery with the princes, watching them play and babble and fight over toys. They were growing so fast, changing every day. But they still reached for her when they were scared, still called her name when they woke from nightmares, still looked at her like she was their whole world. Kale found her on the 3rd night, sitting on the floor with Caden asleep in her lap, and Kieran building a tower of blocks nearby. "You're missing the party," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "I've never been good at parties." "Fair." He walked over and sat down beside her. "The Queen's officially announced you as part of the royal family. The nobles are losing their mind." "Good or bad?" "Both." He grinned. "Some think you're a saint. Some think you're a threat. Most just don't know what to make of you." "Story of my life." Kale was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You did it, you know. What you set out to do. The boys are safe. The kingdom's changing. You won." Lyra looked down at Caden, at his peaceful sleeping face. "It doesn't feel like winning," she admitted. "Why not?" "Because I lost so much to get here." She swallowed hard. "My innocence, my certainty, the idea that the world was fair." "The world's never been fair." Kale's voice was gentle. "But you made it a little better. That counts for something." Lyra leaned her head against his shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything. Anytime." They sat there in comfortable silence, watching Kieran stack blocks higher and higher until they toppled over, making him giggle. And Lyra thought, maybe this was enough. Maybe she didn't need a wolf or a title or a place in history. Maybe she just needed this. A moment of peace. A room full of laughter. 2 little boys who loved her unconditionally. Maybe that was winning, after all. 6 months later, the kingdom held its first council meeting with representatives from all classes. Nobles, soldiers, merchants, and even servants. It was chaos at first. People shouting over each other, demanding to be heard, clashing over policies and priorities. But the queen held firm. And slowly, painfully, they started to listen. Lyra attended the meeting, sitting beside the queen with the princes playing at her feet. She didn't speak much. Didn't need to. Her presence was enough, a reminder of what the kingdom was fighting for. A future where everyone mattered, where strength came in many forms, where a wolfless girl could stand beside queens and kings and be valued for who she was, not what she lacked. After one particularly heated session, a merchant approached Lyra. "You're the one who saved the princes," he said. "Yes." "My daughter's wolfless too." His voice was thick with emotion. "She's 6, and every day she comes home crying because the other kids call her broken. Useless." Lyra's chest ached. "I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry, just—" He swallowed hard. "Just keep showing up, keep proving them wrong. Because if you can do it, maybe she can too." He walked away before Lyra could respond, but his words stayed with her. That night, she told the queen about the conversation. "We should do something," Lyra said, "for the wolfless. Create programs, schools, something to show them they're not broken." The queen nodded slowly. "You're right, but I can't do it alone. I need someone to lead it, someone who understands what they're going through." She looked at Lyra. Lyra's eyes widened. "You want me to— Yes. I don't know anything about leading programs or— You know what it's like to be invisible, to be dismissed. to fight for every scrap of dignity. The queen's gaze was steady. That's more important than any training. Lyra thought about the merchant's daughter, about all the other children out there who felt worthless because they didn't have wolves, about the girl she used to be. Okay, she said, I'll do it. The queen smiled. I knew you would. That's it. 2 years later, the kingdom was unrecognizable. The palace had been rebuilt, its walls stronger than before. The Council of Voices, as it came to be called, met regularly, and real changes were happening. Laws protecting the wolfless, schools teaching trades and skills instead of just combat. A shift in how people thought about power. It wasn't perfect. There were still nobles who resisted, still people who clung to the old ways. But it was better. And Lyra, once invisible, once nothing, was at the center of it all. She ran the Wolfless Initiative, a network of schools and support systems across the kingdom. She traveled to villages, met with families, listened to stories that broke her heart and fueled her determination. The work was exhausting. Some days she came back to the palace so tired she could barely stand. Other days she faced resistance so fierce it made her want to quit. But then she'd see a child's face light up when they realized they weren't alone. Or she'd hear a parent thank her through tears. Or she'd watch a wolfless teenager graduate from one of her programs with skills and confidence they'd never had before. And she'd remember why she was doing this. Every night she came home to the palace. To the princes, who were 4 years old now and wild as wolves, pun intended. They ran through the halls, climbed on furniture, drove the servants crazy. Caden was bold and fierce, always the first to try something new. He'd inherited his father's intensity, but tempered it with kindness. When other children were mean to the wolfless kids who sometimes visited the palace, Caden was the first to stand up for them. Kieran was quieter, more thoughtful. He watched everything, asked questions that made the tutors nervous, and had a way of seeing through people that was unnerving in someone so young. But he was also gentle, patient, the kind of child who'd sit with someone who was sad until they felt better. They were going to be incredible leaders someday, and Lyra would be there to help them become those leaders. On the 3rd anniversary of the king's death, the queen held a private ceremony in the garden. Just the 4 of them, the queen, Lyra, and the princes. They planted a tree, not for the king, but for the future, for the kingdom they were building together. The boys took turns shoveling dirt, their faces serious with concentration. When they finished, they stepped back and looked at their work with pride. It's small, Caden observed. All trees start small, the queen said, but with time and care, they grow strong. Like us? Kieran asked. Exactly like you. The boys beamed. Lyra knelt beside the sapling and pressed her hand against the soil. We should make a promise, she said. What kind of promise? Caden asked. That we'll take care of this tree, watch it grow, and that we'll remember what it stands for. What does it stand for? Kieran tilted his head. Lyra thought about how to explain it. About the kingdom that had thrown her away. About the fight to rebuild it into something better. About the children who were growing up believing they had worth. Hope, she said finally. It stands for hope. The queen smiled and placed her hand over Lyra's. I like that. The boys added their hands to the pile. They stood there for a while, watching the sun set over the garden, their hands linked over the soil of a tree that would outlive them all. He would have hated this, the queen said quietly. Good, Lyra replied. The queen laughed, a real, genuine sound that made the boys giggle. You've changed, you know, the queen said. When I first met you, you couldn't even look me in the eye. I was terrified of you. And now? Lyra smiled. Now you're family. The queen's expression softened. Thank you. For not giving up. On the boys. On me. On yourself. Lyra didn't respond with words. She just squeezed the queen's hand. Because the truth was, she hadn't given up. She'd fought. She'd survived. She'd changed. And now, standing in a garden with a queen, 2 princes, and a future she'd helped create, she finally understood what it meant to win. Not by being the strongest or the fastest or the most powerful, but by refusing to let the world tell her she was nothing, by proving, again and again, that she was enough. That night, Lyra tucked the princes into bed. Caden grabbed her hand before she could leave. Lyra? Yeah, bud? You're not going anywhere, right? You're staying. Lyra's throat tightened. I'm staying. Promise? I promise. He smiled and closed his eyes. Kieran was already asleep, one hand clutching his blanket, the other stretched toward Lyra. She kissed both their foreheads and stepped into the hallway. Cale was waiting outside, leaning against the wall like he always did. They asleep? He asked. Finally. Good. He pushed off the wall and fell into step beside her. You got plans tomorrow? The usual. Meetings, paperwork, trying to convince stubborn nobles that change is good. Sounds thrilling. It is, actually. Lyra smiled. What about you? Thought I'd stick around. Make sure you don't get into trouble. I don't need a bodyguard, Cale. I know, but you've got one anyway. He grinned. Besides, someone has to keep you humble. Lyra laughed. They walked through the palace together, past tapestries and portraits and windows that looked out over a kingdom slowly healing. Lyra paused at one of the windows, looking out at the lights of the city below. You ever think about leaving? She asked quietly. Finding somewhere quieter, simpler? Kael shrugged. Sometimes. But then I'd miss watching you change the world. I'm not changing the world. Yes, you are. You just don't see it yet. He stood beside her, following her gaze. Those kids you're helping, they're going to grow up and have kids of their own. And those kids are going to grow up in a world where being wolfless doesn't mean being worthless. That's legacy, Lyra. That's change that lasts. Lyra felt tears prick her eyes. I just don't want them to feel the way I felt. They won't, because of you. They stood there in comfortable silence, watching the city. Thank you, Lyra said finally, for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. Anytime. Bullshit. Years later, when the princes were grown and ruling the kingdom with wisdom and compassion, historians would tell the story of the wolfless guardian, the girl who saved two princes and changed a kingdom. Some would call it a fairy tale, others would call it a legend. But the people who lived through it, the children who attended her schools, the families she helped, the kingdom she transformed, they knew the truth. It wasn't magic, it wasn't destiny. It was just a broken girl who refused to stay broken, who chose courage over comfort, who loved fiercely and fought harder, who proved that strength doesn't come from what you're born with. It comes from what you choose to become. Lyra never forgot where she came from. She kept her old servant's clothes in a chest in her room. She still ate in the kitchen sometimes, sharing meals with the staff who'd once ignored her. She made sure the princes knew the servants by name, made sure they understood that rank didn't determine worth. And when they were old enough to understand, she told them her story, all of it. The rejection, the pain, the fear, the choice to run, the fight to survive. You were brave, Caden said when she finished. I was terrified, Lyra corrected. Bravery isn't not being scared, Kieran said quietly. It's being scared and doing it anyway. Lyra smiled through her tears. When did you get so wise? We had a good teacher. On Lyra's 30th birthday, the queen threw a celebration. The entire kingdom was invited. Nobles and servants, merchants and soldiers, wolfless and shifted. Everyone. Lyra stood on the palace balcony, looking out at the crowd, and felt overwhelmed by the sheer number of people who'd come. They're here for you, the queen said, standing beside her. They love you. They love what I represent, Lyra corrected. Hope, change, possibility. Same thing, the queen smiled. You gave them a future where they could be themselves. That's worth celebrating. The princes appeared, now young men of 16, tall and strong and confident. Speech time, Caden said, grinning. I hate speeches. Too bad. You're giving one anyway. Kieran handed her a piece of paper. Lyra looked down at it. It was blank. You want me to improvise? You're good at that, the queen said. Lyra took a deep breath and stepped forward to the edge of the balcony. The crowd fell silent. She looked out at them, thousands of faces, all turned toward her, waiting. I'm not good at speeches, she started. I never was, but I want to say something anyway. She gripped the railing. When I was a child, I was told I was worthless, that because I didn't have a wolf, I didn't matter. And for a long time I believed that. I let that define me. The crowd was completely still. But then something happened. Two babies needed me, and in trying to save them, I saved myself. I learned that worth isn't something you're born with. It's something you create through your choices, your actions, your refusal to give up. Her voice grew stronger. This kingdom used to measure people by their power, by their bloodlines, by whether they could shift. But we're changing that together. We're building a future where everyone has value, where everyone has a voice, where no child ever has to feel worthless because they're different. A tear streamed down her face, but she didn't stop. I'm not special. I'm not magic. I'm just someone who refused to accept that being broken meant being useless. And if I can do that, if a wolfless servant can stand here today and help shape a kingdom, then anyone can. Anyone. The crowd erupted into cheers. Lyra stepped back, her legs shaking, and the queen pulled her into a hug. That was perfect, the queen whispered. Lyra couldn't speak. She just held on and let herself feel it all. The love, the acceptance, the belonging. She'd started with nothing, and she'd become everything that mattered. Years passed. The princes became kings, co-rulers who governed with wisdom and compassion. The kingdom flourished. The Wolfless Initiative expanded to neighboring territories, and Lyra, no longer young but still fierce, continued her work. She never stopped fighting for the forgotten, never stopped believing that everyone deserved a chance. On her deathbed, surrounded by the people she loved, she looked at the two men who'd once been helpless babies in her arms. "You did good," she whispered. "We learned from the best," Caden said, his voice thick with tears. Kieran took her hand. "Thank you for everything." Lyra smiled. "It was my honor." She closed her eyes, and her last thought wasn't of pain or regret. It was of two tiny princes who'd changed her life, of a queen who'd given her a family, of a kingdom that had finally learned that strength comes in many forms. She'd been nothing, and she'd become everything. And that, more than any crown, any title, any power, was the real victory.